An introduction to trigonometric functions. What is a trigonometric function? Trigonometric functions are functions that are used to model or predict periodic behavior. Here is an example. The Bay of Fundy, located between the provinces of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, has the highest tides in the world. High tide can reach up to 11 meters to 15 meters in height with 100 billion tons of seawater flowing in and out of the Bay of Fundy in one tide cycle. Now we all know that the tide repeats. It comes in, it goes out. It comes in and goes out. This is an example of periodic behavior. Here, the tide is out. A tool that will be useful in this lesson is the unit circle that we looked at and uses the data that was developed in lesson 2 on special triangles. If you take a circle, divide it up into angles, put in the radian measures, and put the corresponding cos and sine values, we get what's called the unit circle. And this is the unit circle that you will need or make use of, which is found in mathisfun.com as we work through this particular video. And what we will do now is we will take the circle and we will unwrap it. And as we unwrap it, we will plot those points on a graph. Let's see how that will work. So now, if we take the sine function and we make a chart of the sine values for angles from 0 to 2 pi, every pi over 6 radians, and here we've started the graph by taking the circle and showing pi over 6, pi over 3. From the unit circle, you will notice that the cosine value of pi over 6 radian is square root 3 over 2 for the cos value and 1/2 for the sine value. This gives the value of sine as 1/2, which is 0.5. So we will now take a chart or a table and we will fill it in as we calculate the sine values for the angles as we move around the circle. And I've shown you here that pi over 6 we found is 0.5. Pi over 3 was square root 3 over 2 as a decimal is 0.866. Pi over 2 is 1. 2 pi over 3 was 0.866. 5 pi over 6 was 0.5. And pi is 0. We are going to continue this pattern. And you will see that we've divided the whole circle this way. So here is your completed circle. And now your completed table of values. Now we know that from a table of values, we can draw a graph. We have an x and a y value. So on your graph paper, you've got your table that we've created using our unit circle. We have our XY axis, and we now plot our points. If we take our points, the next step is to take the table of values and plot the coordinates on the graph. And then draw your line. Now let's add some terminology. The period, or one cycle, or one pattern of the behavior, is the length of one of the waves from 0 to 2 pi. A line cuts through the horizontal middle of the graph, and it is called the axis of curve. The distance from the axis of curve to the highest point is called the amplitude. The amplitude represents the distance from the axis of curve to the highest or the lowest point. The highest point we call the maximum, which is the greatest value that the graph will reach. And the lowest point is called the minimum. Let's review the terminology. A periodic function is a function that has a pattern of y values that repeat at regular intervals of its domain. A cycle is the name given to one complete pattern of the periodic function. The horizontal length of one cycle is called the period. The amplitude is half the distance from the maximum and minimum values of the periodic function. The maximum point, the highest value that the function reaches. The minimum point, the lowest value the function reaches. The axis of curve is the line that passes through the horizontal middle of the graph. The amplitude is the distance between the maximum point and the axis of curve. The period, again, one complete cycle. The x-intercepts are the points where the graph crosses the x-axis. The y-intercept is the point where the graph crosses the y-axis. The domain is the set of all values that can be used in the equation for x. And the range is the set of values that can be used in the equation for y. So here are the default values for a sine function. The starting point is 0, 0. The maximum value occurs at pi over 2 and 1. The midpoint value occurs at pi and 0. The minimum value occurs at 3 pi divided by 2 and -1. And the final point, or the end point, occurs at 2 pi and 0. The amplitude is 1. The axis of curve is y equal to 0. And the period is 2 pi. Now, it's time to practice what you've learned.